You want to talk about movies? Okay, great. Me too. Stop me if you've heard this one before. Marvel has lost its way. Marvel hasn't been the same since Endgame. Marvel is doing too much too quickly. Superhero fatigue is real and it's finally taken effect. And finally, Marvel has gone woke and now it's gone broke. That last one is not a real criticism and you shouldn't listen to anyone who ever says it is. However, I do think it's fair to say that now that we're in the wake of Marvel's first out-and-out commercial flop with the Marvels, that the Mouse House of Superheroes isn't quite at the same high watermark it was just a few years ago. Is this actually the end of the MCU, or is it actually part of a much bigger problem that's been with Marvel since nearly the beginning? Thank you so much for watching. If you could go ahead and like, comment, subscribe, share this to someone who you think might like it, and double share it to someone who you think probably won't like it. That helps me a lot. Thank you so much. But that's not to say that everything post-Endgame has been a huge downgrade, but to me, I think it's been more of a mixed bag. If you're wanting to know like a quick rundown of my opinions of the past couple of phases of Marvel, Black Widow was basically pointless, Chun-Li was enjoyable, What on Earth was Quantumania, The Eternals I wanted to like more than I did, Spider-Man, all the Spider-Mans was good, at least I remember it being, but the only thing I remember is just waiting to all the Peters were on screen. Doctor Strange was good, but I think the problem it was trounced by a much better multiverse film that came out at the same time that had nothing to do with superheroes, didn't help. What was Quantumania? I wanted to like Thor 4 despite it not being very good. Guardians 3 was one of the best comic book movies of all time. And lastly, what on earth was Quantumania? So it's not that it's out and out bad, but what is the chatter that's revolving around Marvel these days? A lot of people are saying the same thing. It's not as fresh as it once was. It's not innovating. It feels much more the same. It feels like it's expanding much more than it is actually getting better, and they're focused on expanding the universe than it is telling proper stories at hand. What if I told you that the problems that we're seeing now with Marvel are some of the similar problems that we've seen with Marvel since nearly the beginning, but now we're seeing them on a much bigger scale? Whatever could I be talking about? Well, I'm glad that you didn't ask. Let's look over the history of Marvel to see if I can show you some of the patterns that I've seen. See, oftentimes Marvel starts out with a very ambitious idea, something that a lot of people say just couldn't happen. For this example, let's start at the very beginning. Marvel sets out with its own ambitious goal. Let's see if we can start making our own movies. No longer at the whims of whatever studio holds whatever rights to whatever characters. We're going to develop projects and make movies based on our own characters that we have the rights to. Taking a big gamble on itself. And then what happens? Well, then we get the first Iron Man. A great crowd-pleasing movie that shatters expectations, both critically and commercially. People said revolutionized comic book movies overnight, at least for a few months before The Dark Knight came out. But I do think it still stands as a watershed moment for comic book movies, and it's Marvel's first big success. But then what happens? Well, then we get Iron Man 2. A film that still was considered good on its own merits, but didn't quite live up to its predecessor. Some of the criticisms about it is that, again, it felt more the same, but not quite as original as last time. It didn't grasp the audience in the same way, and it felt like the film was much more focused on setting up their future than nailing the story at hand. This leading to frustrations of one of the major creative forces behind the first two deciding not to return for the third installment. This being the director of the first two Iron Man, Jon Favreau. But before we could see how Marvel can make adjustments, Marvel was actually on to its next big ambitious idea. Avengers. This is Marvel's next big bet on itself. And this was their proof of concept of having their fully established comic book movie universe, of having individual characters come together for a massive crossover. And the movie was a massive success, both critically and commercially, financially blowing everything out of the park. People lauding it for its tone, its irreverent blending of characters, its quippy dialogue, and its massive special effects action. It was great. Changing the industry seemingly overnight. It was no longer cool for a studio to have one IP-driven franchise. Now you need a full multitude of IP-driven franchises that all connected in a fully blown-out franchise. It was a lot being a film fan at this time, but now again, Marvel needs to repeat its past success with its next big crossover, and, well, let's be honest, they whiffed a little bit in the follow-up, Avengers Age of Ultron. Movie I still like and I will defend, but I think the feeling coming out of that one was, well, it didn't have the same spark as the first one. It felt more the same, but not as good. The character interactions weren't as fun, and the movie felt like it was much more involved in setting up future stories than it was actually telling the story at hand. Before we can look to see how Marvel made adjustments, let's look at this pattern and see how it applies to current Marvel. The first big project in this case was the Infinity Saga. This was their big ambitious goal of everything that they set out for themselves, of having a fully fleshed out comic book universe, all coming together to have one big massive crossover. And it's been a bigger success than anyone could have ever hoped for. But now where are we? Well, now we're in the follow-up that doesn't quite live up to the magic as the first project. In this case, we're looking at the Multiverse Saga, with the majority of critics landing on the same things that it did before. It's no longer as fun as it once was. It feels much more the same. It feels like it's trying to expand much more than it's trying to get better. This potentially leading to friction with one of the major creative voices behind the first two deciding not to show up for the third. And I'm looking at you, Kevin Feige. Let's not get too ahead of ourselves, but I do think if past this prologue, well, then this poem is starting to rhyme. It does sound like I might be a little harsh on them now, but I do think it's worth taking note that Marvel, whether you like them or not, or if you like superhero movies or not, or even if you just like big budget movies at all, the narrative risk of choosing to bring an entire comic book universe to screen, i.e. having different characters, having their own journey and their own continuity, all crossing together in this own huge, I don't know, mega continuity, and to have a huge, large universe expanding crossover events, it's a bold risk to take. It's easy to look at what they did now and see how well it paid off, but you should give credit where credit is due. Even if some of the projects have felt a little more cookie cutters than they have in the past, the entire idea of a shared universe is a massive creative swing. And I like creative swings. I think going back to taking risks, taking creative swing is where they should be going next. Let's look back to see how Marvel had to respond to its first sophomore slump. How did Marvel respond with ending its first trilogy with a character that they set up, addressing everything that happened before in the crossover, while also losing the director of the first two, and somehow still making it the highest grossing of the series? Well, Marvel actually made a very interesting call here whenever it came to directors, and believe it or not, they gave them some creative control. They gave it to buddy cop, writer, director, master, Shane Black. So say what you will, but I think it's one of Marvel's best, and you can definitely feel Shane Black's fingerprints all over it. It's not even one of Marvel's most director-driven films, but it gives it more of a texture than, I don't know, Quantumania? Like, seriously, what was Quantumania? I'm not saying that giving directors more freedom is going to be a panacea for everything at Marvel, but I do think it's a major element of what Marvel should be leaning on and into more, giving creatives more latitude to express creative freedom over your shared continuity of universe. I know what you're saying, that's not how Marvel works. And I would grant you that they don't always have the best reputation whenever it comes to that. However, on particular projects, when they do allow creatives a little more latitude, it will, well, I'll be honest, it's a little more of a mixed bag than you would have hoped. A prime example of this would be the Taika Waititi Thor movies. Those definitely feel like Taika Waititi movies, and the first one blew everyone away. The second one was a little too loosey-goosey behind the set and wasn't received nearly as well, leading to Taika deciding not to show up for the third one. So yeah, it's the Marvel pattern again. Then you have something like The Eternals, a movie from an Academy Award-winning director Chloe Zhao that wanted to tell this story with these particular characters, and it was a movie I really wanted to love. I didn't. It's a bit of a sloggy mess, isn't it? Then you look at the Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy, a proper trilogy from a direct storyteller of writer-director James Gunn, a person they literally couldn't force off their project, and it's undoubtedly some of the best stuff that Marvel has ever done. And it's another reason why I'm much more excited about the future of DC than I am over Marvel, something I couldn't imagine myself thinking a mere few years ago. Obviously, the problem with Marvel runs much deeper than just giving creatives a little more control, but I do think it would go a long way into differentiating what has become a very homogeneous product. I would take a huge swing and miss like the Eternals over the factory stamp blah of Marvels. Even though technically I like the Marvels more than I like the Eternals, and even now I'm getting confused by my own points. Okay, let me lay it out like this. Marvel is now in a creative pattern of not being able to continue the success moving forward. And it's a place that they've been before, but now it's on a much larger scale. Marvel in the past has shown it can make adjustments and bring something new to the table just when you think that they're done. So if you'll allow me to wax on a few more broader things that I feel like the MCU can take note of to help make their adjustments. First things first, there are way too many projects that are way too spread out. Remember when Marvel had like 2 or 3 theatrical releases a year? And remember how that felt like a lot? Well, it was. And now it's 3 films released every year, 3 shows on Disney Plus. That's not including whatever their special events on. And so not only do you have to see movies in theaters, you also have to watch 8 episodes of television on a streaming service you don't really want just to know who the other 2 people are in Captain Marvel 2. And I think the heads of the MCU are starting to get that now. Looking into 2024, they've already delayed a couple of projects, and now there's only 1 or 2 shows being released and only 1 movie, and that movie is Deadpool and Wolverine, and that has to be a big swing for Marvel one way or the other. So I'm glad, Marvel, you're already listening to me. Next, Marvel, please make sure your scripts are figured out beforehand. I know Marvel is very famous for having its big interlocking continuity or setting things up years in the future, but in reality, they've actually been much more fly by the seat of their pants and laying out the track in front of them as they go. Then they come off, and then they also do a lot whenever they fix it in post, and then fix it again in post, and then fix it one more time in post for good measure. I'm so sorry, VFX artist. And I'm not saying that Marvel should stop fixing things after the fact, but a more solid foundation will lead to less cracks later on, and that way you wouldn't have to reshoot an entire Captain America movie. I mean, can you imagine how grumpy Harrison Ford is on set right now? God, I love that man. Next, Marvel, simplify the meta-narrative. What I mean is, if you look at the Infinity Saga, you had to keep track of the 6 Infinity Stones that all did their own little thing, and one big bad guy that wanted to collect them all to use them as the ultimate weapon. This making all of our heroes having to join together for the ultimate good to fight the ultimate evil. To know all these things, you really only needed to watch, at most, 3 movies a year of consistent quality. And even that, it wasn't 100%. I mean, come on, what did the Soul Stone even do? You can look at something like the Multiverse Saga, where there is an infinite number of Marvel timelines that all have their own unique versions of Marvel characters, some of them from old movies made by other studios, some of them are brand new, and all of this is revolved around one big bad guy who turns out is an actually big bad guy. At the point of writing this, Jonathan Majors has just been cut from the role of Kang, so you gotta circle the square on that one, but good luck. But then you have that character who has infinite number of versions of itself, and to know all of this, to gather all of this continuity, you have to watch a bunch more movies of increasingly varying quality as well as individual TV shows, and I've gone cross-eyed. But you see what I mean. This feels like a lot, right? Marvel, as a fan, because I know you're definitely listening to me right now, we all know where this is going. We all know that this is to get all the timelines together so that way we can have a big old secret war, and that way we could have a movie all about a battle world. Smashing all the timelines together, all probably leading just to reboot the entire universe. Big shock, I know. But that leads to an interesting question. Should the MCU just reboot itself and start from scratch? Listen, the MCU set out to make a comic book universe for the screen, and they've achieved that. Good on them. They've worked very hard to build a universe, and it went as well as you could possibly imagine. However, I feel like it might be too much like a fully fleshed out comic universe. Now there are so many characters setting up so many different storylines, and your pull list has gotten way too long. You'll never get to that Nick Fury adventure, so you don't know what he did and why he's with Captain Marvel now. You're never going to get to those back issues. And that, you also have way too many legacy heroes, people who weren't the originator of the heroes, in the mantle. And now that you've established a huge big continuity, it's much bigger now, but it's not better. So how did the funny pages that these $200 million movies are based off do when this happens? Well, they'll usually have a big old crossover dust up where they'll establish a fully new timeline, setting up things and playing fast and loose with whatever continuity that happened before. Think of like how Flashpoint set up the New 52, or Marvel Now, or the OG Crisis on Infinite Earths. And oh look, DC Animation is doing that right now. So originally, whenever I heard that the MCU might be rebooting, I revolted, but more and more I think about it, it just makes sense. Having a new timeline where you can tell new stories with new actors and familiar roles, it's really the best way I can see moving forward. I'm sure you'd get some consternation from old MCU heads, but they'll either adapt or they've already been gone since Endgame. In the past, Marvel has talked about, in recasting Iron Man, that they would just do a James Bond and have a new actor as Tony Stark and not bring him back to the cave. I'm sure Kevin and the gang are looking at this opportunity to have that, but still connect in their full continuity that they've set up. And speaking of Kevin, assuming Kevin Feige stays on, he needs a number 2. Before James Gunn was fired from Marvel and then rehired from Marvel and then became the DCU architect, it was heavily rumored that he would become Kevin Feige's right-hand man, building out the universe moving forward. I think Kevin needs someone like that. Someone who knows the universe backwards and forwards and can help develop new projects and new storylines and keeping consistent quality across the board while also having a very fresh perspective. Lastly, it's okay if Marvel doesn't receive the same high watermarks as it did before. We're probably living in a post-peak superhero world. That doesn't mean that superheroes are gone. Far from it. It just means that I think the bubble has popped a little bit and we're in a little bit of a cooling off period. To heat things up, things need to be shaken up a little bit. And Marvel, if you swear to shake things up, we swear to listen. That's all I have to say about that. It's not entirely true. I have much more to say about a lot of things, but that's where I'm going to leave it from now. But I would love to hear it from you about what are your thoughts about everything that I've said so far today. Please comment below and let me know. I'm wanting to make this a more general film and entertainment channel, so I'd love to hear from you. What do you want to hear from me about other things, entertainment topic related? Comment below. I would love to hear from it. But for now, thank you so much for liking, commenting, subscribing, and just doing everything. And yeah, okay, bye.